All right, so here we go. Let me welcome you to this program, one-day program that we call Qualifying Opportunities. I think you're going to see over the course of the day that we're together, what we have done is that we've sort of redesigned content that's been around for many, many years. And we've redesigned it and restructured it in such a way that internal facilitators to your companies can actually deliver this without having to rely on us to come in and actually have to do that for you. It's been designed specifically so that it becomes very practical very quickly. So what I'd like to suggest is that all of you have in mind a real client opportunity, a real deal and initiative. If you don't have an external client, because some people don't work externally, sometimes people work internally, is it fair to say that internally we all have clients too? You know, there's some sort of initiative, some sort of decision that we're trying to make somebody, that we're trying to enable. So if I could ask you to have something relatively important in mind that you would like to advance today, because by the end of the day, we do want to make sure that you leave with some very tangible things that you can do to advance that opportunity. All right, so let us jump in. As you can see from the title right here, is we subtitled this a 12-week playbook system. One of the main things, one of the main premises that we established right at the beginning with this particular program is that this is not a training event. It really goes beyond training. It's a 12-week commitment. Now, 12 weeks, as we say that, it sounds like, oh my gosh, there's this avalanche of stuff that I'm going to have to do, and I'm already very busy, and how on earth will I do this? Well, if I could ask you just to put all those sorts of barriers, those sort of limitations, those mindset limitations maybe, to one side, because it's our premise that training in and of itself does not work. You've got to do stuff after the room. Would you agree with that? Have you noticed we go to how many sales trainings have you ever been on? Like about 1 million? We could add up all the years that we spent in sales training in this year and would get, to 2 billion years of sales training. Have you noticed at the end of every sales training that we attend, I think I've done every one like you have. Have you done Spin and Miller Hyman and Holden? Have you done all of those? Like I have? I've been selling for 25 years like all of you. And we leave the room and it's all high fives and it's all, all that good stuff. And then the phone rings on Monday morning. We say hello and we're back to same old, same old. That's the rationale for this 12-week commitment. And we're gonna suggest that this 12-week commitment is not overbearing actually. In fact, it's the work that we should be doing if we're all client-facing. Are all of you client-facing? Yeah. All right. So very quickly, these are the materials that we've asked you to open up. You'll notice that you have a manual. Also, inside the kit, and I'll explain how we use the manual and how we kind of progress through that. You'll also notice that we have these pads of worksheets. If you could all get these out. And it's one pad with various types of worksheets. As we go through the day, I'm going to explain what these worksheets are and how we actually use them. A really critical piece of the course that we're going to be doing today are these, what we call these cards. These are role plays. These are exercises. Does everybody have these? Could you make sure you've got these open? Yeah. These are role plays and exercises that I'm going to ask you to do. This is not going to be a program where you just sit there and somebody in front of a room tells you stuff and explains stuff and is a sort of talking head. That's not it. We're going to ask you to actually role play some of these sort of conversational skills that we think are absolutely critical in our engagement with our clients. So that's what these are. And I'll explain how to use these a little bit later on. And all of these materials are available electronically in this thumb drive. So you'll have all the pads and all what we call the practice cards, the videos that you're going to see. All of this is available electronically, so you can actually take something and refer to it after today. So those are the materials, and we'll explain and use them as we go through the day.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Craig Christensen. I'm the co-practice leader at Franklin Covey's Sales Performance Practice. We're delighted to have you with us today as facilitators. We put a lot of thought and energy into producing a wonderful product to help you with a 12-week playbook system to better qualify your pipeline. I have with us today Nick Harrison, who is a senior consultant and our subject matter expert in designing this program. So Nick, thank you very much for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
I thought we'd have Nick share some of his thoughts about how to best prepare for this program. Certainly when a facilitator is teaching, a key part of that is preparation. What tips would you offer in terms of how to be prepared for this program?
Well, I think, Craig, one of the first things a facilitator has to realize is that what we're presenting here is not a one-day training event. It goes really beyond that. This is really a 12-week process. And we've actually mapped out these 12 weeks in terms of what we call a playbook. So as a facilitator, I'd suggest you got to get real comfortable with what this whole process is. And more or less, the content of each one of these weeks that are included into that playbook. I think that's the first thing that we've got to bear in mind.
Okay.
Secondly, I think as a facilitator, you've got to make sure that sort of leadership knows what's going to happen, because we're actually going to be asking for quite a big commitment from participants, because they will have to do something over the next 12 weeks, week by week. So leaders are going to have to sort of buy into this. So as a facilitator, make sure that you get leader buy-in before you actually start inviting people into the session.
Yeah, and sometimes leaders aren't bought in. And the 4-week accountability, if they're not going to their sales leader, who else could they be thinking about?
Yeah, I think one of the key things that we've embedded into this whole process is this idea of a coaching partner or coaching partners.
Yeah.
It really is, we're going to ask people to select somebody that they feel comfortable with,
okay,
that they might want to go to actually sort of report back over the course of the 12 weeks as to week by week what seems to be working, what they've tried, what they didn't try, how things are going, what progress is being achieved.
Yeah.
And to your point earlier on, every 4 weeks we're going to make this a little bit more formalized. If you do happen to have a sales leader or a manager that you report to, and maybe you have sort of a monthly meeting with that person already, you can really use that meeting to actually check in on a 4-week basis with that leader and tell him or her about the progress that you're achieving.
Okay, so it sounds like whether you have a formal sales leader or you go to the facilitator or someone in your coaching partnership, the key is accountability.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Any other key ideas that people need to do to be just totally dialed in so they just nail this?
Yeah, I think a facilitator really has to sort of rely on the video significantly to actually do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the teach. We'd advise facilitators not to be too involved in adding to the teach, because the teach has been very carefully crafted into the videos. Now, what the facilitator does have to be very good at is getting people in and out of exercises that have to do with the video that everybody just watched. Also with the debriefs. After an exercise, be very good as a facilitator at generating the discussion around the particular skill that everybody just practiced.
So Nick, do you mind just taking us through the materials? This participant guide isn't like every participant guide. Tell us about the differences.
Yeah, I think one of the things you notice right away is that the participant guide really forms the first part of this book that I'm holding right now, and the second part is really the playbook that we've already referenced. So the first part really has got all the content, all the stuff that we need to refer to.
That's what you're using in the training program?
Absolutely,
okay,
yeah.
Great.
And in addition to that, another key part of the materials that we have are these sets of cards. Now, we call these cards, they're really role plays.
Yeah, these are in the exercises.
Yeah, and
okay.
this is how people actually begin to practice the real-time articulation of the skill set that we're actually focusing on.
Nice.
And all of this information, all of these elements that we have right here are available in this thumb drive right here. So there's a way to reference this as we move forward out of the one-day session.
So some participants will actually get a disk instead of a flash drive, but the key is they'll have everything they need.
It's all together, all there.
Nick, how do you suggest that facilitators help their participants prepare for coming into the course?
I think part of it is really getting people to understand that they need to come to the program with something in mind to work on. The more practical this is, the better it's going to be. So people have to come into the program with a client, an opportunity, something they want to work on.
Yeah, because that's what they're going to be working on during the day.
Exactly,
okay.
and then they come away with a real-time application of what all these skill sets to that opportunity. So a certain amount of pre-work, we might call it.
Okay.
I think also something else to bear in mind is that as people walk through the day, there are going to be some very specific examples in the participant guide that help people see a certain standard as to what a good call plan looks like. as to good at handling a specific objection might look like. There's some really good examples for people to use and to compare what they've thought about in the participant guide itself.
Yeah, great. So as people they come prepared with their pipeline. I mean, what they've got, that's the purpose, and this begins the 12-week process. So Nick, as part of the foundation, very early in the day, they start kind of setting the groundwork for some very critical aspects. What are some watch-outs for the facilitators as they think about kind of the 12 weeks coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's think about that. One of the possible things that might happen is that people might very well push back on this whole idea of having to find a coaching partner or coaching partners and then create that accountability that we mentioned earlier on.
Yeah.
So as a facilitator, I think you need to be pretty firm about this. You cannot allow people to leave the room unless they've established who those coaching partners are really going to be.
Okay.
Another pushback might be this idea of the 12 weeks. It seems like an awfully long process and commitment to 12 weeks. Actually, we found that it is precisely because of the 12-week process that people actually begin to generate consistently superior results. So as a facilitator, if anybody begins to push back on the 12 weeks, get them to try it out before they dismiss the whole process.
Yeah. So Nick, a lot of facilitators don't feel like they're the seasoned sales professional they might need to be in order to facilitate this program. They might be a little nervous about, getting challenged in the program and getting pushback. What would you suggest?
Yeah, so let's think a little bit about that. I think one of the first things you have to realize as a facilitator is that you do not have to have every answer for every question all of the time.
Makes sense.
You don't have to do that. What we would suggest is that you kind of throw the question back to the group and ask, well, has anybody else come across that sort of situation, that sort of issue, and how did you deal with it? And even throw it back to the person that's giving you that question and say, it sounds like you've just come out of a situation where that happened. What did you do? How did you handle it? What worked? What didn't work? And I think as you kind of throw the question back to the group will naturally sort of answer the question for you without you having to feel that you've got to have that answer to begin with.
Yeah. So instead of feeling like you have to answer everything, feel free to hand it back to them. So Nick, maybe you could address the samples in here, because there's several pages that aren't actually addressed in the facilitator guide, but are in the participant materials.
Yeah, something that we've noticed over the many, many years that we've been doing these sorts of things, that salespeople especially like to have examples.
Yeah, very true.
Of things like the call plan and the decision grid and an opportunity worksheet. So lots of those examples are included in the participant guide. Now, the expectation is not that as a facilitator, you're going to walk through all of those examples and actually see how this is written here and this is written there. That's not the point. These are just examples for people to refer to once the day is over.
Yeah, these are a difference maker in helping people understand what good really looks like.
So please, if I could ask you once again to go back to your call plan. And can you see where it says key beliefs? Now that you have an end in mind, could I ask you to key beliefs? What are those 3 or 4 items that the client needs to check off to get to the end in mind? And if I could remind you about the 3rd bullet right here on the screen. What will you do to actually bring the key belief to the table? How will you explain it? So in terms of key beliefs, we've already established the importance of key beliefs and how they have to actually tie to the end in mind. There's got to be some sort of connection there. Once again, let's hear a couple of key beliefs, examples, and then offer some feedback in terms of how well it actually connects to the end in mind. And if we were the client, and we were to walk through the sequence of those key beliefs, do we believe as a client that would actually be able to arrive at that end in mind? So, Darren, you want to share?
Absolutely.
The key beliefs? Tell us what the end in mind is and the key beliefs that you've established.
Okay, well, the end in mind is to be considered as a player with the IT and clerical recruiting challenges that they're having in this organization.
Okay.
And moving forward in the process.
To be considered as a player in the whole process.
Yes.
Very good. What are the key beliefs that you established?
So the key beliefs that I've established is I want to confirm that making a change is infinite. It's going to happen. Secondly, that business process outsourcing is a valid option. And thirdly, that the return on investment is going to be there.
Yeah, so what do we think? If we were the client and Darren walked us through that series of key beliefs, would we be able to arrive at the end in mind, which is, once again?
It's to be considered as a player in assisting them with the IT and clerical recruiting challenges that they're having in the
Yeah,
organization.
so what do we think? Just state your key beliefs once again.
Confirm that making a change is definite. Secondly,
Change is definite.
that business process outsourcing is a valid option, and that return on investment is going to be there.
What do we think? Would that get us to the end in mind if we were the client?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Are they sequenced sort of logically, the key beliefs? This sort of feedback I'm going to ask you to give one another a little bit later on. Thanks very much, Darren. Austin, I think you had another one?
It was to decide if and what type of embedded engineering capabilities would add value to the scope of the project.
Yeah, which type of capabilities would add value to the project? That's what we want them to tell us in this meeting.
Yes.
What are the key beliefs?
That they were going to need a support and structure system to support the project after it had been purchased. The easeability of the process for the engineering company, they're going to be the first line of defense. So for them, to make the project go as easily as possible, and the profitability that they would have, being, the in-between person between us and the end user, sales and the end user.
Yeah. So what do we think if we heard those key beliefs and we were the client, could we get to the end in mind? I think so, absolutely. So just before we leave this, before I get you into actually giving feedback to one another with your partner, remember, be very critical about the sequence of your key beliefs. Sometimes you need to do the most important one first and then the lesser ones, or sometimes they have to be very, very sequential. You decide the best way to do this. There's no real definitive way to do this, one way to do this. All right, let me get you with your partners and give one another sort of feedback that we just gave Austin and Darren. And take a look on the screen, what I'm going to ask you to do. Share your end in mind. Just remind your partner about the end in mind. What are the key beliefs? How will you address each one? And get some feedback. Are they really and truly client-centric? Are they incremental steps that will enable actually the end in mind or not? Are they sequential from one to the next, to the next, to the next? Get some feedback from your partner again. If you could turn left or right. All right, if I could ask you to draw that discussion to a close. And once again, let me ask you, what did you notice? What did you observe in terms of the key beliefs that you wrote down? Some of the coaching that you got from your partner? What did you notice? What did you observe in some of the key beliefs that they wrote down?
Yeah, one thing I saw was that we had very different scenarios, but what it still came down to was an issue of trust. They had to trust that even that small decision was going to be the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're going to have to talk about this trust thing, because it is the backdrop to everything, isn't it? We're going to get into that a little bit later on in the day. Yeah, that's real good. What else do you notice, do you observe?
I noticed Prabhu, he was very clear, very concise, very clear statements.
Yes.
Which helps certainly with the communication internally to get the team on the same page, I think.
Yeah, you bring up a point that I think is worthwhile thinking about. The more clinical your call plan is, the clearer everything is for everybody that's going to be actually in the meeting. Now, that does not mean to say that we need to be overly clinical in the meeting itself, right? We're going to have to be engaging and have conversation and build a trust and all these sorts of things. The thing is that in the preparation for the meeting, anything that's concise and clinical, that's very helpful. Yeah, what else did you notice as you went through that, sharing a little bit of feedback with one another?
I think that no matter what the key belief was, how we were handling it seemed to be along the same lines. We were providing referrals. We were, again, building the trust. No matter, like you said, what that scenario was, whatever the issue was, there were similar resolutions.
Yes. Now, this topic of referrals, let's make sure you remember one of the premises is that this has to always be very, very client-centric. Because maybe we on our side, we think that these referrals are just going to nail it. It's just what the client needs to hear. And by the way, they always talk very well about us. Otherwise, they would not be referrals, right? So are we really serving the client well at this point with referrals? Is it premature? Or are we at the point, and if we did offer some referrals, what should our referrals actually talk about that would be interesting to our client? Then the whole thing becomes very client-centric. Yeah. Anything else? Did I see another hand? Yeah.
I found it interesting, and maybe I was the only one, but by focusing carefully on my key beliefs, it helped me tighten up the end in mind.
Yes.
So it was very integrated, because I got more clarity, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, is it fair to say that as you begin to think about your ends in mind, your key beliefs, you actually, does this really connect with the end in mind or not? Does something have to change? Because maybe the end in mind isn't quite right. The key beliefs are good, it's just that the end in mind has to change. Or maybe the end in mind is right, it's just that look where I went with the key beliefs, I started going off on a tangent. So it's almost like you've got to have this intellectual rigor to always be running up and down this ladder, right, to connect the ends in mind to the key beliefs back to the end in mind. Yes, sir.
Let me share another one. It really pointed out that I have a lot of work to do with addressing those beliefs.
Yes.
And it involves the whole organization
Yeah.
to pull together the pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. All the hard work we're going to have to do to actually put the proof point or the key belief on the table.
You were talking about that cycling back and forth between end in mind and key beliefs. As I was writing my key beliefs, it really made me evaluate what was in it for them in my end in mind. It had made me really think real hard of what's the win-win.
Yeah. Yeah, anything that we can do to sort of displace ourselves from ourselves, put ourselves in the shoes of the client, and then say, if somebody presented this to me, would I be convinced? Would I really be able to get to the end in mind? Yeah. All right, so whilst everything is still fresh in our minds, could I ask you please to go back to your learning journal? Remember where you're making notes for yourself? Now that we've just heard some of the results from each of these 3 flip charts, anything that you want to write down, that you want to make a note of before it slips your mind. Could I ask you to think about how will you apply this call planning skill to your reality, and specifically to the client that you chose to work on today? And could I also ask you to think about a meeting that you've had in the past that you still sort of is a little bit of a thorn in your side because actually you did not plan effectively enough. There was no end in mind for that meeting. You weren't pretty rigorous about the key beliefs, and there was no preconditioning. And what learnings can you apply given that memory, given that experience? Because we not only learn from the good, we learn a lot from the bad. Would you agree? All right. If you would go to week 1 of your playbook, remember we always refer to the 12-week system. If you go to week 1, right there you'll see what we're suggesting that you might like to do in order to reaffirm and sort of get into your professional DNA, your professional bloodstream, this whole idea of call planning. And week 1 is right there for you to consider. All right. So here we go. Let's get into some content now. I mentioned in that video 3 essential mindsets. We call these mindsets. This sort of is how we think. We've got mindsets, how we think, skill sets, what we actually do, and results that we actually want to achieve. So mindsets, skill sets, results. Those are the 3 components that we're going to be referring to during the course of today. The mindsets that we'd like to offer you today are these 3 that we think are pretty critical in a client engagement environment. We call these enable decisions. Isn't that what good salespeople need to be able to do? Enable decisions over the course of the selling cycle. Win fast, lose fast. We'll give you some rationale for that and how both are good options. And then handle objections. Have you noticed so many clients have got so many ways to shut down the dialogue and push back and send us into RFP land and talking to procurement and all that sort of stuff? We need to have equal ways to keep the conversation going. Because one of the key premises of this whole approach is that you really advance deals on the basis of critical thinking and critical dialogue skills. Would you agree with that? So what is it? How do you maintain the dialogue when you're getting all sorts of pushbacks? How do you maintain the dialogue when you say, I need to see the CIO, and they typically say what? No? They're too busy. You can't. It's against the rules, all that sort of stuff. So how do you keep the dialogue going? Those are the three mindsets that we'd like for you to bear in mind. Now, we're going to introduce you to this gentleman that we call Ben, and the rationale for Ben and who he represents will become clear as we actually get into the next video. The skill set that directly connects to this first mindset that we call enable decisions is call planning. What we'd like to do is share with you what we would consider to be effective call planning, always in the spirit of compare and contrast with what you already do. There's no one way to do things in selling. Would you agree? In business development. You know, we all have preferences. We all have things based on our experience that we want to keep that are working for us. So in the spirit of compare and contrast, let me ask you to consider what we would consider to be good call planning. So thank you for doing that. All of that came out of that video. What I'd like to pick up on right now is go in the direction that, I think it's prevalent throughout the discussions that you've had at all of your tables. This idea of intent, this idea of authenticity, and how do we become a lot more sort of consciously aware of how well placed our intent really is. So let me set it up like this. Let's say over here we have a salesman. Typically, even stereotypically, what sort of characteristics, what sort of intent do we associate with this person over here? Sorry? To make a buck. To make a buck? Yeah. What else? Aggressive, yes. Pushy, yeah. Anything else? Self-interest. Self-interest. It's all about his commission and his sale and his numbers, all that sort of stuff. What else? Salesperson.
Insincere.
Insincere, yeah. So from what you're telling me, this person sounds like something of a reptile. He should be living in the desert with a couple of snakes and a couple of scorpions, you know, that sort of individual. Now, let me take you over here to the central part right here. Let's say we've got a consultant here. What sort of intent or characteristics do we associate with this individual? Consultant.
Wanting to help the client.
Wanting to help.
I was going to say problem solver.
Problem solver, yes.
He doesn't have a stake at it, so he's looking at other people's interests.
Looking at other people's interests, yeah.
He's consulting, so he doesn't have as much of a vested interest in the...
Absolutely, yeah, a little bit more detached from the particular sale, for example. Yeah.
Credibility.
Yeah, these people tend to be subject matter experts, don't they? Anything else about the consultants? There's some good things.
Usually a good listener.
Yeah, usually a good listener. On the other hand, have you ever come across a consultant who is a good talker? And the more the talk, the more bored you get? Because they know a lot about what they know about, and they know a lot about what they know, and they tell you they know a lot about it.
Potentially expensive.
There you go. So maybe sort of 50-50 person, some good things, some maybe not so good things. Now over here, let's say, we have the trusted advisor. You know, what intent or characteristics do we associate with this person?
More of a partnership.
Yeah, more of a partnership. Yeah, doing with the client. Yeah, very nice.
You can share, you're able to share a lot more information because you trust that he'll use it correctly and not against you to try to manipulate.
Yes, all those barriers become less prevalent because of the sort of intimacy and the proximity that we have. And even the bad stuff that's going on in my company, I'm a lot more willing to share that with the trusted advisor than the reptile over there, right?
I think in it with me for the long term.
Yeah, yeah. Long-term commitment to one another, yeah. So I'm gonna ask you, you know, where do you want to position yourself? You know, it's a conscious choice that we have to make with regards to our intent. And in general, given the sort of complex environments that we all work in, it's all about gravitating that way rather than this way. So right off the bat, if I could ask you, is it okay if we just jump right in? Is that all right? All right, so here we go. Open up your participant guide and write on the very first page, since I am going to be asking you to stand up and move around the room and find somebody to work with that's probably not from your company, could you just write your name on the front page right here so you don't lose sight of your manual? Because you will write notes in here. They're going to be pertinent to you, and I don't want you to lose the manual. So just write your name there so you can identify it. And then if you go to page 1, right here in the manual, as you think about qualifying opportunities, advancing deals, could I ask you to write down maybe here 3 or 4 typical challenges that you come across in terms of qualifying opportunities? Barriers or challenges that you typically find when you're trying to advance a deal, either internally or externally. Just write down 3 or 4 ideas, if you would. All right, so let me stop you there as far as you got. Just begin to shout out, if you would, some of the challenges, some of the obstacles maybe that you face when you're actually trying to qualify a deal. Just begin to shout out some things. Do you have one?
Access to the right decision maker.
Yeah, there you go. Access. Yeah, other things.
Budget.
Yeah, the whole idea of money. Yeah, and resources in general, right? Time, people, money. Yeah, anything else?
Not completely understanding the client's goals.
Yeah. Just let me write that. Understanding goals. Yeah, very good. What else over there at that table?
Politics?
Yeah, the internal politics. Very good.
I always try to identify the genesis changing event. You know, what's driving a change, and do you have the ultimate component of that?
That's sort of the driver. Yeah, very good. Anything else that you find?
Maybe not getting all the information, hesitant to share a lot of information.
Yeah, very good. Very good list, real stuff.
Overcoming fear of new products.
What do you mean by that?
Since we're a startup and we have more of a disruptive technology, it's very for an established engineering or technology company to try something new. It's some fear there.
Yeah, let me write that. Try something new, because if I'm a client of yours and you're going to ask me to break my status quo, you know, this better be pretty compelling, right? You got to give me something that sort of pokes me in the eye, something that wakes me up, something in which I see potential value very quickly. Otherwise, there's too much fear. Have you noticed many times the biggest competitor that we have is the status quo? Is not necessarily another company. Yeah.
That goes along with another thought I had, which was preconceived ideas.
Yeah. Excellent. Very good. And we could probably think we could spend all day doing this, actually. You know, all the challenges that we face as client-facing people in terms of, you know, barriers and unwillingness to advance deals many times on the client side. Is it fair to say they're pretty dysfunctional in some aspects? It's fair to say we're pretty dysfunctional in some aspects. Yeah. So dysfunctionality is alive and well. That's the reason we're in the room today, to kind of break some of that dysfunctionality, right? Let me introduce you to this element that we call the qualified checklist. Remember, win fast, lose fast? It's all about continuously assessing over the course of the business development cycle whether we continue to qualify in or do we qualify out. So one of the ways that we suggest you make those assessments over time is by actually thinking about a very quick, what we call the qualified checklist. So on a scale of 1 to 5, as you look at where you're at on this opportunity that you've been working on today, on a scale of 1 to 5, do you understand the issues? 1 would be no, because I haven't had the conversation yet. 5 would be yes, and probably to your point, and they've been validated by the client. That would be a 5. So I'm going to ask you, please, on page 25 in your manual, or maybe we also have it. Yeah, we've got in the worksheets. We've also got a qualify checklist there. Could you read the items there and give yourself a score on a scale of 1 to 5 with regards to each one of these items on the qualified checklist. Now, if you don't know, or it has not been validated by the client yet, that piece of information, give yourself a low score. There's nothing wrong with a 1 or a 2. It's just where you're at on that particular topic. And then anything that's 3 or below, what will you do to move the needle? What meeting, what dialogue, what structured conversations do you need to have with whom to actually begin to move the needle? And then what I always like to do with my checklists, I'll always identify one thing that I'm going to focus on immediately, right, short term. If there was just one thing, for example, right here, I've circled, I've given myself a 1 on understanding the issues. I mean, there's no way I can possibly do the rest if I don't even understand what the issues are. So that's what I'm going to focus on with this particular client over the next 10 days. So as I think about understanding the issues, getting the issues from a client, probably the skill sets that I'm going to need over the next 10 days are specifically move off the solution and structure a conversation. So I remember my skill sets because those are going to be the ones I'm going to need at my fingertips over the next 10 days. That's how we suggest that you use this qualified checklist.